It's Thursday, the 15th of May. Welcome to the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. Now, I apologize for the late upload today of the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Our youngest boy, Muggsy, had an all-day tennis tournament that kept me away from the microphone until now. So it's actually the PDB Early Evening Bulletin for today. We'll get back to the normal time tomorrow. All right, let's get briefed. First up, U.S. energy officials are reevaluating the national security risks posed by Chinese-made equipment critical to America's renewable energy infrastructure after discovering what appears to be, and this is shocking, spy devices hidden inside Chinese solar power inverters. Who would have thought? Oh, well, I guess a lot of people would have thought. We'll have the details. Later in the show, high-stakes direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine that were planned for Thursday in Turkey hit a major snag as Russian President Putin decided to skip the negotiations. Apparently he had something better to do, instead sending a junior delegation in a snub to Kyiv and President Trump. Why, it's almost like Putin isn't interested in cutting a peace deal. But first, today's afternoon spotlight. U.S. energy officials are warning that America's critical infrastructure is dangerously vulnerable to Chinese espionage efforts. Two sources linked to the U.S. Department of Energy exclusively told Reuters that the Trump administration is reevaluating the national security risks posed by Chinese-made devices used in America's renewable energy infrastructure after making some startling discoveries. They say that over the past 9 months, officials have found numerous rogue communication devices hidden inside equipment from multiple Chinese suppliers that power America's energy grid. The devices include cellular radios and other equipment that could allow firewalls to be circumvented remotely. Now, the findings suggest a coordinated effort by the communist regime to infiltrate core U.S. infrastructure and raise questions about America's reliance on energy-related technologies produced in China, not to mention other technologies, including telecoms gear. The latest concerns revolve around power inverters, which are predominantly produced in China and used throughout the world to connect things like solar panels and wind turbines to electricity grids. They are also critical components of batteries, heat pumps, and electric vehicle chargers. For some background, power inverters are typically built to allow some level of remote access for updates and maintenance, but utility companies usually install firewalls to prevent direct communication back to China. But, according to the sources that spoke with Reuters, the recent discoveries of communication devices not listed in product documents has raised fears that the CCP could bypass these firewalls with potentially catastrophic consequences. The devices were reportedly found by U.S. experts who regularly strip down equipment hooked up to energy grids to check for security vulnerabilities. The U.S. government, however, has not publicly acknowledged the findings, making it hard to know just how widespread the problem is. Here's a pro tip. It's probably fairly widespread. But one source warned that the rogue communication devices could, in theory, be used to remotely switch off inverters or alter their settings, which could destabilize domestic power grids and damage energy infrastructure, potentially even triggering widespread blackouts. The source told Reuters, quote, that effectively means there's a built-in way to physically destroy the grid. The sources said they declined to be named as they don't have permission to speak on the matter to the media. They did not specify which Chinese manufacturers were linked to the hidden devices or how many the U.S. government has found. Retired Admiral Mike Rogers, a former director of the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, told Reuters, quote, we know that China believes there's value in placing at least some elements of our core infrastructure at risk of destruction or disruption. I think that the Chinese are, in part, hoping that the widespread use of inverters limits the options that the West has to deal with the security issue, end quote. The findings come at a time of heightened tensions between the U.S. and China, whether over trade tariffs or China's escalating military harassment of Taiwan. It's prompted the government to rethink America's dependence on China for strategic infrastructure technologies. Well, one could argue that on that front, Elvis has left the building. Here's hoping that the U.S. and its allies aren't just now rethinking their dependence on China. As you may recall, last fall similar concerns were raised regarding the cybersecurity risk posed by Chinese-made cranes used in American ports, which are responsible for 80% of U.S. container operations. Many of the Chinese-made ship-to-shore cranes were found to contain unlisted, quote, suspicious devices, including cellular modems that were actively connected to operational crane components. In November, the U.S. Coast Guard warned that the cranes could be exploited through remote access capabilities by the communist regime for espionage or operational interference. The Coast Guard subsequently issued a maritime security directive that outlined heightened security measures to address these risks, though American port operators have reportedly been slow to act on the guidance. In addition, there's the issue of Chinese-produced telecoms equipment being purchased and installed by regional U.S. telecoms providers. Now, the gear was often sold to the U.S. companies at or below cost at prices that just didn't make any sense, until you understand that the purpose was simply to get their gear installed on towers across the country, particularly in locations close or adjacent to sensitive U.S. military facilities. Meanwhile, to address broader security risks linked to Chinese technologies, 2 U.S. senators introduced legislation in February that would ban the Department of Homeland Security from purchasing batteries from 6 Chinese entities that they say are closely linked to leaders of the CCP. While that bill is still being debated, major domestic utility companies are already preparing to shift away from their reliance on Chinese inverter manufacturers. Florida Power and Light Company, for example, the state's largest power supplier, is already seeking alternative suppliers to minimize the use of Chinese-built inverters. Officials with the U.S. Department of Energy did not specifically address the concerns around Chinese-made power inverters when asked about the report from Reuters, but said they are continually assessing risks associated with emerging technologies. In a statement, DOE officials said, quote, while this functionality may not have malicious intent, it is critical for those procuring to have a full understanding of the capabilities of the products received, end quote. Unsurprisingly, officials with the Chinese embassy in Washington denied any subversive intent. I told you it was unsurprising, telling Reuters, quote, we oppose the generalization of the concept of national security, distorting and smearing China's infrastructure achievements, end quote. And then they winked and chuckled to themselves. All right, coming up next, in a major snub to Kyiv and President Trump, Russian President Putin decided to skip planned direct talks hosted in Turkey to end the war in Ukraine. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Let me take just a few seconds of your time to talk about your security, specifically your online security, and more specifically, to talk about a great company called Delete Me. Now, Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone feel vulnerable. It's easier than ever, as you probably know, to find personal information about people online. Look, having your address, your phone number, your family members' names, all hanging out on the internet can have actual consequences in the real world, right? And why take the chance? Look, have you ever been a victim of identity theft or harassment or doxing? If you haven't, I suspect you probably know someone who has. And that's where Delete Me can help. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. And now we have a special discount for PDB listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting PDB to 64000. The only way to get that 20% off, well, it's simple. Just text PDB to the number 64000. Message and data rates may apply. Hey, Mike Baker here. This July, right? You may have heard about this, but this July there's going to be a global summit of BRICS nations happening in Rio de Janeiro. Now, this bloc of emerging superpowers, it includes China and Russia, India and Iran, they're meeting with the goal of displacing the U.S. dollar as the global currency. And they're calling this the Rio Reset. Catchy name, huh? Now, as BRICS nations push forward with their plans, demand for U.S. dollars, well, could decrease, bringing down the value of the dollar. And while this transition, of course, won't happen overnight, the Rio Reset marks a pivotal moment when BRICS nations and their objectives move from possibility toward reality. So, you ask yourself, how can you protect your hard-earned dollar savings? Well, one way is to check in with the professionals over at Birch Gold. Birch Gold Group can help you move your hard-earned savings into a tax-sheltered IRA in precious metals. Claim your free information kit on gold simply by texting PDB to 989-898. Look, with that A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, let Birch Gold arm you with a free information kit on owning gold before July and the Rio reset. Just text PDB to the number 989-898 today. Welcome back to the Afternoon Bulletin. Ukrainian President Zelensky arrived in Ankara today for high-stakes ceasefire talks with one goal in mind, a direct meeting with Vladimir Putin. But the Russian president's decision to no-show casts doubt on Moscow's interest in peace, just in case you needed more reasons to cast doubt on their interest in peace. Putin, who had left the door open on his attendance for days, ultimately sent a junior-level delegation in his place, headed by former Culture Minister Vladimir Bedinsky, best known for leading the failed 2022 Russia-Ukrainian Istanbul talks. The move drew a scathing rebuke from Zelensky, who derided the Russian delegation as mere, quote, theater props, accusing the Kremlin of showing contempt for both the Trump administration and Turkey's mediation efforts. Following a nearly 3-hour closed-door session with Turkish President Erdogan, Zelensky announced that a Ukraine team led by his defense minister would head to Istanbul for talks with low-level Russian representatives, possibly alongside American and Turkish officials. The mission, he said, would have one goal: discussing the implementation and monitoring of the Trump administration's proposed 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Zelensky made clear that he would not engage with anyone but Putin himself. Still, he said he was sending negotiators, quote, out of respect for Trump and Erdogan. Zelensky stated, quote, despite the relatively low level of the Russian delegation, we still want to try to take at least the first steps toward a ceasefire, end quote. The absence of Ukraine's military general staff and intelligence leadership from the delegation underscores the limited scope of the Istanbul talks, if in fact they proceed at all. Zelensky's government has flatly ruled out any discussions involving territorial concessions or future security arrangements unless Russian forces halt their offensive. And with Putin nowhere in sight, Ukraine has little reason to expect a breakthrough. Meanwhile, President Trump on Wednesday, speaking from Doha as part of his ongoing Gulf state diplomacy tour, reiterated his central role in the process. He told reporters he might travel to Turkey, quote, if something happened, but later, aboard Air Force One, clarified, quote, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, end quote. Trump's top envoys, Steve Witkoff, Keith Kellogg, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, are expected in Istanbul to represent the U.S. delegation. As our listeners will recall, all three have been engaged in back-channel efforts to gauge whether Moscow is serious about a Trump-brokered truce, which begs the question, how many high-level officials does it take to realize that Putin isn't serious? Ahead of the Zelensky-Erdogan meeting, Rubio and Senator Lindsey Graham also met with Ukraine's foreign minister in Antalya, Turkey, to discuss Kyiv's negotiating stance. If the talks do commence, Russia's playbook appears unchanged. According to Ukrainian officials, the Russian side is once again floating elements of the 2022 Istanbul draft agreements, which demanded sweeping Ukrainian concessions, including demilitarization and bans on advanced weapons systems. Kyiv and its Western allies have categorically rejected those terms as a non-starter, branding them incompatible with Ukrainian sovereignty. As we discussed on today's PDB, European leaders from France, Germany, Poland, and the UK traveled to Kyiv last week to back Zelensky and to warn that failure to reach a ceasefire would prompt tougher sanctions against Moscow. Trump is also weighing so-called secondary sanctions targeting Russia's oil exports. That, of course, would be the Putin regime's main revenue stream. And that, my friends, is the PDB Afternoon, well, let's call it early evening, bulletin for Thursday, the 15th of May. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And, of course, as you may know, to listen to the show ad-free, well, just become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. It's that simple. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back tomorrow. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, Mike Baker here. Let me take just a little bit of your time to talk about something important. Eating smart, eating healthy, right? Now, a big part of that effort is knowing where your food comes from, how it was raised and handled. After all, if you don't take control of your food supply, well, someone else will, and it'll probably be some large faceless corporation. Now, something else. If you're a fan of beef like I am, I got a pro tip, a place where you can turn to for the highest quality beef. And of course, I'm talking about a great business called Tri-Tails Beef. Now, Tri-Tails is a fifth-generation Texas ranch. It's run by real ranchers. There's no corporate nonsense, no middlemen, no mystery here. Just pasture-raised, grain-finished black Angus beef that delivers tenderness and rich marbling and great flavor in every cut. Now, this grilling season, stock up before it's too late. And right now, when you order over $349, you get a free choice New York strip. Just go to trybeef.com/PDB Grill. That's trybeef.com/PDB Grill. Your family, your friends, and your grill will thank you.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.